All right, so the president's all in on Congress being all in, but he might be all in if Congress isn't all in.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Oh, yeah, definitely one of the dumbest show opens that we've had here so far, no doubt. But, you know, following the president is kind of difficult. I thought I was pretty good to him yesterday, both here and on the radio, thinking that, okay, he's extending a 6-month wind-down period through Homeland Security and the Department of Justice on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, an acronym that just about every American ought to know by now. But then he got cold feet. And I don't know where this thing is going to go, but I'm ready to bet you that we do not have a DACA solution in the 6-month window. And all heck is going to break loose. Nice to have you aboard. Thank you very much for tuning in to My State of Mind. Dan McGowan is here tonight, the all-star reporter for the city of Providence, but also one of our education specialists here in the building. And we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, education. But I want to get Dan's take because he gets the political pulse here of Rhode Island's reaction to DACA. Here are here's the tweet storm. Pretty benign type of stuff. Hey, Congress, get ready to do your job on DACA. But yesterday, the president kind of, I don't know, choked a little bit. A lot of narrative there. If you have a big screen, you can read it. But the top one, the latest one, suggesting that, if Congress can't get it done in 6 months, he'll more or less step in, which takes all the leverage away. Of course, here in Rhode Island, everybody's on script, including Mayor Lorza from last week and yesterday.
Many of our dreamers came to this country when they were 1 or 2 years old. They had no say in the matter. They had no choice. They have lived here. They've grown up in this country. This is the only country they know.
Of course, Governor Raimondo and Lieutenant Governor and the mayor and Mayor Diosa from Central Falls and everybody got together yesterday to cry foul and talk about how cruel the president is. Welcome in, Dan. Nice to have you.
How you doing?
Very well. A lot of this is script.
Oh, completely.
Completely script.
Yeah.
Can we actually, and Peter Kilmartin, by the way, our esteemed Attorney General, talking about the president having yesterday committed a moral crime and joining other attorneys general in suing the White House for rescinding an executive order. I don't know, man.
It is. I think it is what you expected. As soon as the DACA conversation sort of returned, let's say like mid to late last week, is this looming, decision from the president. You could have basically written the story in Rhode Island before any press conference because you knew what everybody was going to say. I think that polls well here, certainly being a Democrat politician, particularly in places like Providence or Central Falls. Of course you're going to say those things and come out and rally strong against it. It seems like public polling suggests that people want immigration reform, though there isn't a lot of, there isn't a big appetite for throwing teenagers or children out of the country. So it's a safe political move for politicians in Rhode Island. The question is what happens now?
Yeah, well, the state level folks have very little to do with this outcome.
Right.
Now, they can say, we will not honor and we will not abide by any kind of crash down on these DACA young adults, mostly young adults right now, kids in the latter part of school, and a lot of these DACA applicants, because it really is an application process. Right. It's a continual renewal. There's no complete status.
Right. Yeah.
All it is, a promise not to come get you.
Right.
We can say here in Rhode Island that we're not going to cooperate with federal law enforcement.
Right.
We also know that federal law enforcement has not shown any kind of appetite to go find non-criminal, undocumented people in this country. So the deadline looming is real, but the practical implications aren't really that big a deal.
Exactly. Look, if you're a person that is, enrolled in the DACA program, or you had, been applying, there's no question. I understand why you're nervous, and the politicians.
Right, because they'll have your data.
Right. They have your information.
It's like you came out of the closet and said, yeah, here I am.
Right.
Thank you for protecting me.
But I'll tell you, I remember right after the president got elected, say like probably early December actually, when all of this sanctuary city conversation and federal immigration law was really starting to boil up. I got on the phone with someone from ICE and I basically said, look, I cover Providence. People call Providence a sanctuary city. Teach me everything I need to know about where things stand. And the thing that was clear was exactly what you just said. They have never shown any interest in going after 17-year-old kids who have never committed a crime. And their focus, they felt as though the Obama administration was not particularly strong on immigration. You know, they certainly didn't want to go. And so they wanted the tools and all that kind of stuff to be able to enforce the law. But there wasn't a huge appetite, and nothing has suggested that has changed. And so, to your point, does not having DACA mean that you're going to have 800,000 people swept up and thrown out of the country? It seems unlikely.
No, it seems really unlikely. However, it doesn't mean that the worry shouldn't be. Look, if the promise and protection was there, and now it's being removed, obviously, you know, walking in those shoes, that is a cause for concern.
Yeah.
But what really drove me crazy yesterday is some of the scripted stuff. You know, Governor Raimondo talking about the hate coming out of the White House and everything else. Look, the president didn't handle this well for the entire news cycle yesterday, that he pushed this thing off, that his attorney general more or less has said either I can't or I won't defend the United States of America against lawsuits from Texas and other states that are suing about the executive order that Barack Obama put in place. Is an interesting play. That he let Jeff Sessions carry the ball for the most part, it's fine-ish. But really what this is going to come down to is whether or not this is tied to the wall.
Bingo.
Or immigration in general. Some Democrats today were talking about tying it to a debt ceiling authorization. Now that is a little bit of a kamikaze in and of itself. If the Republicans have the guts to just say, look, this thing stands on its own. We need to pass a clean bill on DACA. I think it'll pass 80-20.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, Speaker Ryan I think he said sleep well.
But I don't think they're going to do that because they're worried about, you know, the Bannons of the world coming from the flank and the upstart, you know, real conservative Republicans, you know, going nuts here. And
right. Well, and heading into an election year, it's not easy. I mean, I think Speaker Ryan probably, if it were up to him and if it were up to the, you know, part of the party that really pushed him into the speakership, yeah, sure, I think you're right. He'd probably get it done, but I think there is a real threat about getting this done, you know, heading into an election year from the sort of fringe and growing, you know, more conservative part of the Republican Party. You know, you do wonder though, if the president basically by saying, and I saw those tweets too, you know, I'm going to give you 6 months and then maybe I'll act or whatever. You wonder if he thinks he's going to come in and sort of save the day. And
he doesn't know what he's doing.
That's probably
the president of the United States is not aware of himself, the issues, and all that kind of a thing. What he did by saying maybe I'll act is more or less he took the leverage away and he let Congress more or less have permission to sit on it.
Yeah.
And then he'll end up doing what? An executive order that he suggests needs to be undone because executive orders shouldn't be addressing the issue.
Right.
Poor guy doesn't know what he's doing. Poor America. We got a guy who doesn't know what he's doing.
Glad I cover City Hall.
Yeah, I'm glad you do. And also education. Oh, by the way, Representative Nardilillo, who's running for U.S. Senate, had this very high-level analysis of the whole situation yesterday on DACA.
There's no exception to the rule. There is a process. The process wasn't followed, but the individuals who are here weren't as of their own decision.
Well, thanks for that. Whatever. I just thought I'd throw that in because that candidacy feels like whatever. By the way, is he going to stay in this race if the judge gets in?
Look, I don't know anything about that race, so it's
That's
tough
not
for me
your
to
thing.
say. It's not my thing. I mean, Flanders, though, is a very credible person. He's an intelligent guy. I think he would be a credible candidate. So not an easy primary, and he's a smart guy, very smart guy.
All right, well, let's have Representative Nardilillo back here on the show, and maybe he can elaborate on his deep thinking on
Have
this
you
whole
had
thing.
him on? Have you had Flanders on?
Have we had Flanders on TV? No, we've had Flanders on the radio a lot, right, Lex? No, I think we should. He's been very coy.
Very coy.
About what he's doing or what he's not. Good guy, though.
Very.
You know what we should do? We'll pause here and we'll come back and we'll take care of some of these education issues. In the meantime, I just want to remind you, if you are Thinking you'd love to have full control of your banking life right in the palm of your hand, like some of us want to do, just have everything in the palm of our hand? Card Valet is the app that you should have in the palm of your hand on your smartphone. It allows you to do everything you want in your banking life, not just some quick online banking, but the whole kit and caboodle. It's really fancy and gives you options that no other app does. Available with Navigant Credit Union online at navigantcu.org. Remember, NCUA. We'll be right back.
Are embarrassing in many instances, and it absolutely is having an effect on the morale and the achievement of our teachers and our students. We didn't get into this challenge quickly. It's going to take us some time to get out of the spot that we're in. I believe that we can do it, but it will require big partnerships and big numbers.
It requires money.
Yeah.
It's just money.
Yeah.
It's only money.
In that conversation just after that, I pushed him and said, are we talking about $1 billion number? And he said something like, big with a B. So I think we're talking $1 billion to $2 billion to get every school into, what they call good condition.
So here's a headline from Providence. They're talking about it. Mayor Lourdes is talking about a $200 million finance plan to upgrade the school buildings. The piece of video that you saw there was our esteemed education commissioner, who is reflecting on the reality. The marketability of this state for new young families to come in here is at an all-time low, has been for decades, because the place, with exceptions, high schools that have been remodeled, my town, Cumberland High School, North Kingstown, off the top of my head, I'm sure there are others. The place is a toilet bowl.
Right.
It is a dump. Our infrastructure, the way we look, our roads, the way we maintain ourselves, we are a veritable pigsty. Yeah. And unless and until we get our act together here,
right?
And for some reason, we don't seem to understand that this impacts the economy of this state.
Yeah. Well, I think they understand it. I think there's a question of what we haven't seen, the commitment of what to do on a statewide level with it. We're going to find out next week, I believe, or in 2 weeks. The commissioner is going to put out a report that will be the definitive document that shows exactly what needs to be done in our schools. And we know it's a pigsty, like you said, no question about it.
I mean, you don't have to use the words,
well,
but
no,
I mean, it really is. It's a dump. You cover the city.
Right.
You complain about inner city kids, blah, 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 da, da, da. You go in and see if you could be educated in some of these dumps with the place falling apart like it is.
And don't think that, by the way, there is no question that you're so right. And the reason why Providence has a higher asthma rates and things like that, look, it's connected to the households too, but it's connected to schools that are in. I mean, Mayor Lourdes made that $200 million announcement at Mount Pleasant High School. I live right around the corner. I coach baseball right next to the school. That school is a
dungeon.
It's a dungeon. Yeah, there's great teachers there at times. The school has many of its issues, but that's one of the biggest schools in the city, one of the biggest schools in the state, and that place.
So will this be a comprehensive look comprising the city of Providence?
Yes,
what will happen here?
Yeah, so remember a couple of years ago, there was it was under Commissioner Gist. They put out a report. I think the number they said was about $1.7 billion in repairs. It was back in 2013. And what that report was they asked principals or school administrators at every school in the state to report back, oh, here's the number of, here we've got a leaky roof, we've got this, we've got that. What the Raimondo administration did was say, okay, we're going to hire one person or a group of people to come in to every school and do their own assessment. So now it's, just because you want the floor painted a different way or something like that, that stuff gets taken out. Here are the real needs. Sounds like it'll still be $1 billion problem, so we'll know what the problem looks like. My assumption is not too far down the line, we'll see the governor. My guess is with a campaign pledge to say we'll do $1 billion in improvements over the next X number of years, $2 billion maybe, and I think it's a smart thing to run on just politically, but also it's clearly needed.
Well, it's a double-edged sword in some ways, because the truth of the matter is the politics of this are not as easy as one would think, because those who have kids already gone through school, who are the high quotient of voters, tend to look away from this stuff.
Yeah. No, good point. Such a good point.
And that's a problem. When you have a local action you know, to rebuild a high school or set of schools, the seniors kind of go, well, I paid my dues.
Yeah, go look at Portsmouth, those places on the island,
Yeah, so it's a little less easy than some of us prescribe, but it takes some political will, some vision, and somebody to articulate that. So we've covered a bunch of the school survey stuff, but Dan has focused on a couple of things, including the bullying thing. Here's what the commissioner said about the bullying atmosphere in the schools.
The most important thing for the state is to help make sure that no instance of bullying goes unrecognized, unchallenged, unreported. So not just viewing it as bad action, punitive consequence, but also culture and ways to heal. Kids are watching and kids are listening. So we all need to be good role models, and when we're all good role models, it'll help the community be cohesive at the school level.
Okay, well, all right. So,
yeah, I mean,
what does that mean?
It's tough. When I looked at that story, bullying's obviously always a thing that people talk about. It's an important thing to cover back to school. When you see 24% of kids between 3rd and 12th grade saying they've been bullied within the last year, seems like a big number. The only question I have is I don't know how different it is than when I was a kid or when you were a kid. It's not to be dismissive of it by any means. It sounds like the commissioner thinks districts are, have their stuff together and are trying to address it when it becomes a serious problem. One of the big issues is how you literally, come to sort of justice on it, right? So do you suspend kids and send them out of school? Then they're not learning. That becomes a problem. So there's this whole big kick you're seeing in a lot of districts, Providence included, of restorative justice. The idea that, you do this, you slap on the wrist the first time, and then it works its way up to potentially suspension.
Yeah, I think the question you raise is a good one. If the survey, I never got a survey about bullying when I was in school.
Right.
100 years ago. Did I get bullied in school? Yeah. I can remember being bullied at the bus stop.
Sure.
I remember a weekend where I said to my uncle, my dad was an academic, my uncle was a fighter. And he said, you want to learn how to fight? I said, yeah.
Go in the backyard.
We went in the backyard. He taught me how to throw a punch. Next Monday, kid bullied me in the bunch. I knocked him out. Guess what? I didn't have any bullying going on anymore. I'm not suggesting that that's the answer. And then I didn't. I walked softly. Carried a big stick. But no, I think if we were asked the questions, we all would have said, yeah, I've been bullied. I think the social media environment here is
exactly
amplified the ways that you can get hit, not just inside the school, but it goes 24 hours from the school relationships, and that's a real problem that we didn't have to deal with.
When I was a kid, America Online was the thing, and that was just the beginning of instant messenger and stuff like that. I mean, now, your daughter's in college, it's people younger than her, I mean, they have dealt with an entire life of Facebook and social media and Snapchat, and I think things spread much quicker. Certainly when somebody does something stupid in school or does something stupid out of school, that gets out. It's not just something bad happens on Friday. It's not everyone waits until Monday. It's known by Friday at midnight. And that's a more of a concern, and you have to adjust and adapt to the times.
In the meantime, we need to work on social skills, reportedly. Here's a headline on some of Dan's work here. Providence makes students' social skills a priority. Is this mumbo jumbo, or what is this?
I'll
tell you, they don't have any, which is part of the bullying thing. No one knows how to talk, or listen, or dialogue.
This is something that I'm actually pretty interested in. This idea of what they call social emotional learning, and you see it.
They actually have a caption for it: SEL, social emotional learning.
And you're seeing it not just in Providence, although we focused on Providence. You're seeing it in a lot of places, and the idea is simply trying to work with students to figure out, to help them handle difficult situations without giving up or starting a fight, things like that. So it's not just about your social skills in terms of how you interact with your friends and stuff. It's also, do you have the tenacity to solve that math problem that you don't understand? How are you going to figure it out? How are you going to work with a group to figure it out? That kind of stuff. Look, it's a different look at a thing that we all learned, again, in school forever, right? How to work well with others. That's what you're teaching. It's a renewed focus. It's interesting. You look like you're laughing at me.
I'm just no. I'm not at your analysis. I'm thinking about the teacher challenge. That they now have to be psychologists.
Yeah.
Every teacher's a mini psychologist, and some of them like it, and a lot of them don't.
A lot of them don't. Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, and think about it. I mean, and we can talk all day about teachers who do a good job and some teachers who don't, but think about what you're adding to their plate, right? You're asking them
it's a big job.
You're dealing with kids that in Providence, anywhere, but Providence in particular, you're dealing with kids who are coming in with all kinds of trauma, all kinds of issues, and it's not just your ABCs and your math work. It's what you're dealing with at home, and how do how does that happen in school? What happens in school?
So Dan's been on top of this story of this principal that got jammed up. We got to get an update when we come back. Stay with us.
I don't know the specifics, not involved in the case. I've been involved in a number of cases nationally where there have been allegations of failure to report. When it comes to mandatory reporting, and that's the language we use with regard to these kinds of cases, professionals can be held responsible in two ways. One by omission, one by commission, to use the jargon. Omission, that's the allegation, in this case, failure to report when the law requires a report, so-called mandated reporting. I've been involved in other cases where there are allegations of what's called wrongful reporting, where a report was made, but not in good faith. The evidence wasn't there to back it up. So in this case, we're dealing with an allegation of failure to report.
Right. So the good professor, Rick, was explaining, how schools can do better on any kind of abuse or neglect story. This is a story about the Kazarian Elementary School, and the principal got jammed up on misdemeanor charges for not reporting, but reportedly she reported up in the system. And right now, we still have unanswered what happened to the other 5 or 6 people who were in a pipeline to report out the Providence school system's review of this alleged abuse case of a gym teacher with a few kids. What's the follow-up on this? Or are they just going to hang this principal out to dry forever?
So I checked in as recently as this morning. They say the investigation is ongoing, and this is the police department says this, that the investigation's ongoing. It's hard to make a prediction, but it would be surprising, I would say, that anyone else will be charged. I think that the fact that this person was the principal of the school is sort of why they were charged.
Look, fine, I'm not looking for heads here, but how about a learning lesson declared? The Providence school system says they've reformed their policies of training people up to report to DCYF and whoever. Take the charge away from this woman and let her go back to work having learned a lesson. Yeah. Don't leave her out hanging like this.
What I think would have been appropriate, and to the district's credit, they were very quick right away to acknowledge that they dropped the ball and did not contact.
Then don't hang a professional out to dry.
And my take on this, and this is something I've been pushing for behind the scenes and also very publicly on Twitter and stuff, is they need to come out and go on camera, look everybody in the face and say, we screwed up, here's what we did, here's what we're doing, boom.
Charges dropped, put her back in school.
Exactly.
Well, we'll see. That would be cooler heads prevailing. You want to know Providence or education issues? Dan McGowan, WPRI.com. Thanks, kiddo. Final word when we come back. So, perspective from the Immigration Law Center at Roger Williams University tomorrow night. Professor Deborah Gonzalez will join us again to kind of talk about the realities of this DACA controversy in Washington. So make an appointment for that tomorrow night right here on our State of Mind. See you at 3 on the radio on WPRO. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great night.